A lonely rancher stumbles upon a starving orphan on the edge of his land. What begins as pity quickly grows into something deeper, a bond neither had ever dared to hope for. The wind was sharp that evening, carrying the dust of the prairie across the rancher's land. He had just finished driving the last calf into the corral when he heard it, so faint it could have been mistaken for the moan of the wind. But then it came again, a trembling cry, weak and strained, cutting through the fading light. Nathan Carter dropped the rope from his hands, his boots crunching hard against the dirt as he turned his head toward the sound. His heart jolted. No coyote made a cry like that. No wind could carry that kind of brokenness. It was the sound of a child. Without pausing, Nathan vaulted the corral gate and moved across the field, every stride driven by instinct. The noise came from near the broken fence post by the road, and there, crouched low in the shadow of the ditch, was a boy no older than 8 or 9. His face was gaunt, eyes wide and hollow, his clothes ragged and torn from too many nights in the open. He flinched when Nathan approached, as though even kindness might be another blow. Nathan froze a few steps away, his breath catching in his chest. He had seen hungry drifters before, had watched men waste away to skin and bone. But a child, left to fend for himself on this empty stretch of prairie. Something in him cracked at the sight. The boy's hands clutched the remnants of a crust of bread, so hard and stale it looked like it could break a tooth. Yet he gnawed at it desperately, each bite a battle between his body's hunger and the bread's unyielding stone. "Easy there, son," Nathan's voice came low, careful, like speaking to a skittish colt. "Ain't no harm meant. You alone out here." The boy's lips trembled, but no words came. His eyes darted past Nathan, scanning the horizon like he expected someone to chase him down. When silence stretched, Nathan stepped closer, but the boy scrambled back, his bony frame colliding with the fence. The fear in his gaze was sharp, raw, the look of someone who'd had too many reasons not to trust. Nathan crouched slowly, resting his forearm across one knee. He didn't press, didn't reach. Instead, he let the silence hang, his rough face softening. "You'll catch your death out here," he said gently. "Come on up to the house, got stew on the fire, warm bed too." The child's throat worked as though swallowing words too heavy to speak. Then he whispered, almost too faint to hear, no one wants me." Nathan's breath caught at those words. They were so small, yet they pierced deep, dragging up memories of his own. He had lived most of his life with empty rooms, hollow evenings, and the echo of prayers unanswered. No wife, no children, just cattle and fences and the silence of his land. He had never thought much of it until now, until this fragile voice cut him open. "Boy," Nathan said, his voice firmer now, steadier, "don't you say that, you hear me, don't you ever say that." He stood then, offering his hand, though the boy hesitated, shrinking against the fence, and for a long moment it seemed he might not move at all. But then hunger and cold outweighed fear. Slowly, trembling, he stretched out his little hand. It landed in Nathan's palm, light as a feather, brittle as glass, and Nathan held it like it was the most precious thing he had ever touched. They walked back across the pasture together, though the boy stumbled often, his legs weak. Nathan slowed each time, steadying him with a hand at his shoulder. When the cabin came into sight, the boy froze again, as though the promise of safety was harder to believe than the cruelty of the world. Nathan didn't push. He opened the door wide so the warmth of firelight spilled out into the dusk. The smell of simmering stew wafted through, rich with beef and potatoes. The boy's body leaned forward almost against his will. His stomach growled so loud it echoed off the wooden walls. Inside, the boy sat stiff at the table, staring at the bowl Nathan set before him. His little fingers hovered over the spoon, then gripped it tight. He ate in frantic bites, as if afraid the meal might vanish before he finished. Nathan stood back, arms folded, watching with a heaviness pressing at his chest. Every clink of the spoon, every hurried swallow, drove home the truth. This child hadn't known a full belly in far too long. When the bowl was scraped clean, the boy lowered his spoon, shoulders shaking. He tried to hold back, but a sob broke free, raw and sudden. Nathan stepped closer, kneeling beside him. "What's your name, son?" he asked quietly. The boy wiped his face with the back of his hand, whispering, "Samuel." Nathan let the name settle in the air. Samuel. It clung to the walls, warmed by the fire as if it belonged here. Nathan nodded, placing a rough hand on the boy's shoulder. Well, Samuel, you're safe now, you hear me. Whatever you've been through, it ends here. Samuel's eyes lifted, wet and searching, almost disbelieving. Nathan had no children, no wife, no family to speak of. But in that moment, with the fire crackling and Samuel's small frame trembling beside him, something shifted inside. It was the beginning of a bond he hadn't expected, one that would test them both, tear them open, and change everything about the lives they thought they knew. Samuel didn't sleep at first. Nathan had laid out a quilt on the small bed in the spare room, a space that had been empty for years except for the dust that gathered in corners. He had smoothed the sheets like it mattered, like it was a bed meant for more than storage. Yet Samuel lay there stiff, eyes wide open in the glow of the lantern, clutching the edge of the blanket with both hands as if afraid someone would rip it away. Nathan lingered in the doorway, leaning against the frame, his arms folded but his voice soft. "You're safe here, Samuel. No one's coming for you. Get some rest." The boy didn't answer, only blinked at him, his small chest rising and falling too quick. Nathan knew that look. It was the same one he'd seen in half-broke horses, waiting for the lash of a whip even in stillness. Nathan didn't press him. He only nodded once and stepped away, leaving the door cracked so the boy could see the spill of firelight from the main room. When Nathan finally stretched out on his own bed, the cabin felt different. The silence wasn't the usual kind, that heavy loneliness that sank into his bones every night. Tonight it was thinner, filled with the faint rustle of a child shifting beneath a quilt. Nathan stared at the ceiling for a long while, his mind refusing to settle. He had lived years without company, years convincing himself it was enough. Yet now, with a boy barely strong enough to stand asleep under his roof, the emptiness of those years pressed on him like never before. By morning, the sound of coughing pulled him awake. Nathan swung his legs over the side of the bed, boots on before he even thought of coffee. Samuel was sitting up pale, his thin frame racked with a hacking cough that sounded too deep for comfort. Nathan hurried to the shelf, poured water into a tin cup, and pressed it into the boy's hands. Samuel drank greedily, but his hands shook so bad the cup rattled. "Slow," Nathan urged, steadying it with his own rough fingers. "You'll choke yourself if you're not careful." Samuel nodded, lowering the cup with effort. His voice came out hoarse. "Sorry." Nathan crouched so they were eye level. "You don't owe me an apology, son. You've been fending for yourself too long, that much is plain. Ain't no shame in being worn out." He searched Samuel's face, the hollow cheeks, the bruised circles under his eyes. "How long you been alone?" The boy's lips parted, but he didn't speak right away. When the words came, they were broken. Since my mama," his voice cracked and he shook his head, clutching the quilt tighter around him. Nathan's chest tightened. He didn't push further, not now. Some stories needed time, space to breathe before they could be spoken. Instead, he rose and set to fixing breakfast. The smell of bacon soon filled the cabin, and Nathan noticed Samuel's eyes follow the skillet with a hunger that fought against his trembling body. When Nathan slid a plate toward him, the boy's hands hovered like he wasn't sure he was allowed to take it. Only when Nathan gave him a firm nod did Samuel pick it up, eating small bites at first, then faster when he realized no one was going to stop him. Nathan sat across from him, chewing slowly, studying the boy in silence. Every bite Samuel took stirred something in Nathan's chest he couldn't name. This wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was heavier, deeper. He found himself thinking about things he'd buried years ago, dreams of family, of laughter in a house that had only known his own footsteps. After breakfast, Nathan stepped outside to tend the stock, the crisp morning air biting at his face. Samuel followed quietly, trailing behind him like a shadow. Nathan stopped at the corral, turning to him. "You don't have to come out, son. You can stay warm inside." Samuel shook his head, the faintest stubbornness flashing in his eyes. "I can help." The words made Nathan pause. He wanted to say Samuel was too small, too weak, but something told him not to strip that will away. Instead, he handed the boy a small bucket. "All right then, let's see what you're made of." The boy tried, stumbling under the weight of water sloshing from the bucket. Nathan reached out instinctively but stopped himself, letting Samuel steady it on his own. The boy's thin arms trembled with the effort, but he set his jaw, his bare feet dragging through the dirt. He managed to reach the trough, spilling most of the water along the way, but when he turned back, his face held a flicker of pride. Nathan caught it and felt a tug in his chest. "You did fine," Nathan said, his voice low but sure. "More than fine." That small glimmer in Samuel's eyes stayed with him through the day. But as evening drew near, Nathan noticed the boy watching him with a guarded kind of longing. He sat by the fire, carving at a piece of wood, when Samuel finally whispered, "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Nathan set down the carving, staring into the flames for a moment. He wasn't a man of many words, but he knew when to speak plain. "Because you needed someone, and truth is, I reckon I needed someone too." The boy's eyes widened, confusion mixing with something softer, hope maybe, though it looked fragile as glass. He looked down at his hands, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. After a long silence, he murmured, "Nobody s ever wanted me before." The words tore through Nathan like a blade. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "Well, I do. You understand me. You're under my roof now, and as long as you are, you're wanted. You're not alone anymore." Samuel's eyes brimmed with tears, though he blinked hard, trying to fight them. His small voice quivered. "Does that mean I can stay?" Nathan swallowed hard, his rough hand closing into a fist on his knee. He had never promised such a thing in his life. But now, looking at this child with eyes so desperate for belonging, the words rose unshakable. "Yes, Samuel, you can stay." The boy gasped like those words were too big to hold. He looked at Nathan as if trying to make sense of them, then whispered, "You're like—" He stopped, shaking his head, but the word hung there unsaid, heavy in the room. Nathan knew what it was. Father. A word he had never worn, a word Samuel had never dared to give. It lingered between them, unspoken but alive, stirring the fire, shaking the walls of the life Nathan thought he'd built for himself. But outside, the prairie was not kind. Nathan knew word traveled fast in these parts, and strangers didn't go unnoticed. It wasn't long before questions would come. Who was the boy? Where had he come from? And more importantly, who might come looking for him? For now, though, Nathan let Samuel curl up by the fire, drifting to sleep with his head against the chair leg. Nathan sat watching the flames die low, the boy's soft breathing filling the silence. He had taken Samuel in, fed him, given him a bed. But something told him this was just the beginning, that the bond forming here would be tested in ways he couldn't yet see. And Nathan Carter, a man who had never been called father, would soon learn what it meant to fight for that name. The following days brought a rhythm neither of them had expected. At dawn, Nathan rose with the sun as he always had, boots striking the floorboards, coffee brewing dark and strong on the stove. But now there was another sound in the cabin, the soft shuffle of smaller feet, the rustle of Samuel's blanket as he stirred, sometimes coughing, sometimes whispering a sleepy good morning as if afraid he'd be unwelcome. Each time, Nathan would answer with a steady nod or a warm "mornin', son," letting the boy know he belonged. Samuel followed him outside, though the wind still cut through his thin frame. He would try to carry buckets, stack wood, scatter feed. He struggled more often than not, but his determination was sharp, the kind Nathan respected in men twice his size. And when the boy stumbled, Nathan didn't scold. He steadied him, reminded him it wasn't about how much he could lift, but that he had the will to try. One evening, as the sun painted the horizon with streaks of orange and crimson, Samuel lingered at the fence, staring at the cattle grazing in the fading light. His voice came soft, trembling with a weight he could barely carry. "My mama used to sing to me at night. I can't remember her face anymore, just the sound." Nathan's throat tightened. He leaned against the fence post, arms folded, watching the boy's eyes glisten. "It's all right, Samuel. The Lord gave you that memory to hold onto when the rest slips. Sometimes a song is enough to carry someone's love." Samuel nodded, but tears slipped down his cheeks anyway, catching the last light of day. Nathan reached out and rested a rough hand on his shoulder. The boy leaned into it, not speaking, just letting the weight of that comfort hold him upright. But not all moments were quiet. A storm rolled in one night, sudden and harsh, lightning splitting the sky with a force that rattled the windows. Samuel shot up from his bed with a cry, breath ragged, eyes wide in panic. Nathan hurried into the room, kneeling by the boy's side. "It's just thunder," Nathan said softly, though his hand was firm on Samuel's back. "You're safe here. No harm's common through these walls." Samuel clung to him, trembling, and then the truth tumbled out, words breaking free in gasps. "The last storm, that's when Mama didn't wake up. She was sick and I—" His voice broke and he buried his face against Nathan's chest. Nathan's heart cracked at the confession. He held the boy close, letting him weep, his own throat burning with a helplessness he hadn't felt in years. He whispered low, steady words. "You did nothing wrong, Samuel. You hear me? You did all you could. The good Lord called her home, but he left you here for a reason. You still got a life to live." The boy sobbed harder, but the storm outside seemed to soften as Nathan spoke. At last, Samuel's trembling eased, his small body going limp against him. Nathan carried him back to bed, tucking the quilt up to his chin. Before leaving, he heard Samuel murmur through half-sleep, "Don't leave me, please." Nathan froze, his rough hand brushing the boy's hair from his forehead. "I'm not going anywhere, son," he whispered, the word slipping out before he could stop it. "Son." It hung in the air like a promise. The days that followed pulled them closer. Samuel began to laugh, quiet at first, almost shy, as though afraid the sound had no place here. But Nathan found himself drawn to it, each laugh a crack in the armor he had worn too long. When Samuel toppled headfirst into a haystack and emerged grinning with straw in his hair, Nathan laughed too, deep, unguarded, the kind he hadn't heard from his own chest in years. Yet shadows lingered at the edge of their peace. One afternoon, as Nathan and Samuel returned from checking the herd, a rider approached from the road. Dust billowed around the horse's hooves, and Nathan felt his body tense. Strangers rarely meant good news. The man reined up near the fence, his hat pulled low, his eyes sharp. "Heard tell you got a boy here," the stranger said, his voice carrying over the wind. Samuel froze at Nathan's side, his small hand gripping the rancher's sleeve. Nathan's jaw tightened. "Who's askin'?" The man shrugged, but his smirk carried something mean behind it. "Word travels. Folks in town wonderin' where you picked him up. Ain't every day a rancher takes in a stray." Nathan's hand brushed against Samuel's shoulder, steadying him. "The boy's mine to look after. That's all anyone needs to know." The stranger chuckled low, tipping his hat. "Strays got a way of bringin' trouble, Carter. You might find folks don't take kindly to secrets." With that he turned his horse and rode off, leaving dust and unease in his wake. Nathan stood still, his eyes hard, the boy pressed against his side. He knew right then that their peace was fragile, that someone would come sniffing deeper. That night Samuel sat by the fire, staring into the flames, his voice low. "He's right, I am a stray." Nathan turned sharply, crouching so their eyes met. "Don't you ever say that again. You're not a stray, Samuel. You're here because you belong here. You understand me." Samuel's lip trembled. "But what if someone comes? What if they take me away?" Nathan's chest tightened, his own fears mirroring the boy's. He reached forward, taking Samuel's small hands in his calloused grip. "Then they'll have to get through me first." His voice was steady, fierce with a conviction he hadn't known he carried. For a moment Samuel searched his face, as if testing whether the words could be trusted. And then, slowly, he whispered something so soft Nathan nearly missed it. "You sound like a father." The word landed like a hammer against Nathan's heart. Father. A word he had never claimed, never dreamed he might be given. His throat closed, but his grip tightened around the boy's hands. He didn't speak, couldn't yet. But inside something shifted, unmovable, unshakable. And as the fire burned low, Nathan Carter knew this boy had named something in him he could never walk away from. But trouble had a way of finding its path across the prairie. And soon, the bond they had begun to forge would be tested in ways that neither Nathan nor Samuel could yet imagine. The next week passed under the weight of unease. Though Nathan and Samuel tried to hold to their small rhythm, feeding the cattle, mending fence lines, eating their suppers by firelight, the words of that stranger echoed like a shadow over every quiet moment. Samuel would glance toward the road whenever a rider passed, shrinking back as if expecting someone to arrive with chains or harsh words. Nathan, too, found himself standing longer on the porch each night, scanning the horizon before bolting the door. One evening, while Samuel was gathering kindling near the cabin, Nathan heard hoofbeats again, slow, deliberate, not the hurried gait of a traveler but the steady approach of someone with purpose. Nathan's hand went to the rifle propped by the door. When the rider came into view, he eased only slightly. It wasn't the smirking stranger this time, but Sheriff Morgan, a man Nathan had known for years. The sheriff dismounted, dusting off his coat. His eyes flicked toward Samuel, who froze where he stood, clutching the bundle of sticks to his chest. "Even in, Carter," Morgan said, his voice even. "Mind if I have a word?" Nathan nodded once, though his stomach tightened. "Inside." Samuel lingered in the doorway as Nathan poured 2 cups of coffee. Morgan leaned against the table, tipping his hat back. "Word, reached town you've taken in a boy. Nobody seems to know where he came from. Folks are asking questions." Nathan's jaw clenched. "And since when is it a crime to feed a hungry child?" The sheriff didn't flinch. "It ain't a crime, Nathan, but people worry. There've been rumors, families gone missing out east, children left behind, sometimes taken. I need to know the truth about the boy." Samuel's breathing quickened. His thin frame shook as he stepped closer to Nathan, clutching at his sleeve. The fear in his eyes was raw, a silent plea that tore through Nathan. Nathan set his cup down with a firm clink. "The truth is, Morgan, that boy was out there alone. No food, no roof over his head. I brought him in because no one else would. That's all there is." Morgan studied him, his eyes narrowing. "If someone comes looking, I'll have to ask questions. You understand that? I ain't here to tear the boy from you, but law's the law." Nathan's voice dropped, steady but sharp. "You'll find me standing in the way of anyone who tries." The sheriff let the silence hang. At last he nodded, finishing his coffee. "Just keep him safe, Nathan, and keep your temper. The prairie's no place for secrets to stay buried long." He tipped his hat toward Samuel before stepping out into the dusk. The moment the door shut, Samuel whispered, "He's gonna take me away, isn't he?" Nathan crouched before him, gripping his shoulders with rough but steady hands. "No one's talking you, Samuel, not while I draw breath." His voice carried a weight that made the boy blink through his tears, as if trying to believe words he had never been given before. That night Samuel couldn't sleep. He slipped from his bed and crept to Nathan's room, standing in the doorway. "Can I stay here, just for tonight?" Nathan shifted, pulling back the blanket without hesitation. "Come on, then." The boy climbed in carefully, curling against the edge of the mattress as though afraid to take up space. Nathan lay still, staring at the rafters above, every breath heavy with the knowledge of what was building between them. The boy wasn't just a guest. He wasn't just a burden taken in from pity. He was filling a place Nathan hadn't known was empty until now. Before sleep claimed them both, Nathan heard Samuel whisper, so faint he nearly missed it, "You feel like a father." The words sank deep, leaving Nathan staring into the darkness with wet eyes. He didn't answer, not yet, but his heart burned with the weight of it. The days turned harsh with the bite of late autumn. Winds carried cold across the plains, rattling the cabin shutters. Samuel bundled in coats too big for him, sleeves dragging past his hands as he trudged through chores. He was learning, though, how to hold a rope steady, how to scatter feed without spilling half of it on his boots, how to brush down the horse without spooking it. Nathan guided him with patience he hadn't known he possessed. One afternoon, after hours spent repairing a section of fence, Samuel looked up at him with sudden seriousness. "Do fathers teach their boys these things?" Nathan paused, hammer in hand. He searched the boy's face, so earnest, so fragile beneath the question. "They do, son, they surely do." Samuel's eyes lit faintly, though he turned away quickly, hiding a smile behind his shoulder. Nathan felt his throat tighten, his heart pounding with the truth pressing harder every day. But peace never stayed long. Near sundown, while gathering the herd from the ridge, Nathan spotted two riders in the distance. They weren't neighbors, nor did they carry themselves like men passing through. They watched from afar, their horses still against the horizon, before turning back toward town. When Nathan returned to the cabin, his face was grim. Samuel noticed, his small hands fidgeting with the edge of his shirt. "What is it?" "Trouble," Nathan muttered, setting his rifle by the door. "And I reckon it's common this way." That night, as the fire burned low, Samuel curled up in the chair across from Nathan, his voice trembling. "If they come, if they say I don't belong here, will you still keep me?" Nathan leaned forward, his rough hands gripping the boy's small ones. His eyes locked steady on Samuel's. "Listen to me, Samuel. I've lived a long time without family, without anyone to call mine. I ain't letting go now. If they want you gone, they'll have to drag me down first." The boy's lip quivered and tears spilled, but this time they carried a different weight, not fear, but the breaking open of a heart starved too long for love. He pressed his face into Nathan's chest, sobbing, and Nathan held him close, whispering words he had never dared to speak. "You are mine, Samuel, and I'll fight anyone who says otherwise." In the silence that followed, the bond between them was no longer unspoken. Samuel didn't just see Nathan as a protector anymore. He saw him as something greater. And Nathan, a man who had never been called father, felt the title settling heavy but right upon his shoulders. Yet he knew the world beyond their cabin walls wouldn't rest easy. Whispers were growing in town. Riders were watching. And soon, the fight for Samuel's place by his side would come crashing to their door. The first snow came hard and sudden, the kind that silenced the land under a white sheet and made every sound sharper against the stillness. Nathan woke before dawn to the creak of the roof groaning beneath the weight of ice, the air inside the cabin sharp enough to see his own breath. He stirred the fire back to life with stiff fingers, then turned toward the spare room where Samuel lay curled beneath quilts, only his messy hair peeking out. For the first time in a long while, the rancher smiled before the day even began. "Up you get, Samuel," he said, voice gruff but warm. "World won't wait on us just because it's cold." The boy groaned, burrowing deeper into the blankets. "Feels like the world could wait a little," he mumbled, his voice muffled. Nathan chuckled low, shaking his head. It was the sort of reply any boy might give to his father, and though the words still hadn't passed Samuel's lips fully, Nathan felt it there between them, growing more certain each day. The snow made chores harder. Buckets froze before they reached the trough, and cattle bunched together in the far corner of the pasture, their hides crusted with frost. Nathan worked steadily, Samuel trailing behind him with determination that far outweighed his small frame. The boy's cheeks glowed red from the cold, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts as he pushed through tasks too heavy for him, but refused to abandon. When they finally returned to the cabin, stamping snow from their boots, Samuel collapsed beside the fire, shivering. Nathan tossed another log onto the flames, crouching beside him. "You'll freeze yourself stiff if you don't mind your pace," Nathan said, though his tone carried more pride than scold. Samuel's teeth chattered as he grinned, "But I helped." Nathan reached over, ruffling the boy's hair. "You surely did." The boy leaned into the touch, his eyes closing briefly as though storing up the warmth of a moment he'd feared he'd never know. But peace was fragile. The next day brought another visitor, this time not the sheriff, but the smirking stranger from before, riding up bold as brass through the snow. Nathan spotted him from the porch, his jaw hardening as he set his rifle against the rail. Samuel stood just inside the doorway, his small frame rigid with fear. "Well now," the man called, dismounting with a grin too wide to be kind. "Ain't this cozy? The rancher and his little stray play-in house in the wilderness." Nathan stepped down from the porch, boots crunching in the snow. "You've said your piece once. Don't make the mistake of saying it again." The man spread his hands in mock surrender. "No need to get riled. Just thought I'd remind you, Carter, strays have owners. Someone will come claimin' what's theirs sooner or later." His eyes darted toward the doorway where Samuel stood pale and trembling. "And when they do, I reckon you'll be outmatched." Nathan's body went rigid, every muscle taut with the urge to drive the man from his land by force. But he forced his voice steady. "You ride back to town, and you tell whoever's whisperin' that this boy has a home now. He's not up for claimin' like cattle at auction." The stranger laughed low, swinging back onto his horse. "We'll see about that. Secrets don't last long out here." With that, he turned, riding off into the snowy dusk. Nathan remained standing in the yard long after the sound of hooves faded, his breath rising in angry clouds. He knew it now. The storm wasn't the snow or the wind, but the trouble brewing beyond his fences. That night Samuel wouldn't leave the fire. He sat curled in a blanket, staring at the flames, his voice small. "He's right, isn't he? Someone's going to come, and they'll take me away." Nathan sat heavily in the chair across from him, leaning forward, his rough hands clasped. "Samuel, listen to me. I've lived through droughts, through winters that nearly killed me, through storms that took good men off the earth. I didn't bend then, and I won't bend now. Whoever comes, they'll find me standing between you and them. You hear?" Samuel's lip trembled, but his eyes held his for a long moment. "Why? Why would you fight for me?" Nathan's voice caught, rough and raw. "Because you're worth fighting for. Because in all my years, I've never had someone look at me the way you do, like I matter. You've given me more than you know, son." The words slipped out again, heavy with meaning. Samuel's breath hitched, and tears spilled freely down his cheeks. He rose and crossed the room in a rush, throwing his thin arms around Nathan's neck. Nathan held him tight, his chest aching with a love he hadn't known he carried. "You mean it," Samuel whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm your son." Nathan shut his eyes, pressing his rough hand against the boy's back. "You are, Samuel, as sure as the ground we stand on." But the world beyond their cabin wasn't about to let them keep that peace easily. A week later the sheriff returned, his face grim. "Nathan," he said, removing his hat as he stepped inside, "words come down. Folks from back east are looking for a boy. Description matches Samuel." Samuel stiffened, shrinking back toward the hearth. Nathan rose, every muscle in his frame bristling. "Who are they?" "A man claims to be kin," Morgan said carefully. "Says he's the boy's uncle. He's riding this way, and I can't stop him from coming to your door." Samuel's breathing quickened, panic rising in his small chest. Nathan crouched before him, gripping his shoulders firmly. "Look at me, Samuel. I won't let anyone take you, not if I have to stand with this rifle at the door till my last breath." The boy's eyes filled with terror. "But what if the law says I have to go?" Nathan's own heart clenched, but his voice came steady, fierce. "Then the law will have to reckon with a father who won't let his son be torn away, and I'll see it through, no matter the cost." The sheriff left soon after, his words heavy as stone. Nathan paced the cabin late into the night, the fire burning low. Samuel watched him, small hands clenched around the quilt. "What if he takes me, Nathan? What if I never see you again?" Nathan turned sharply, his voice breaking with emotion he could no longer hold back. "Don't you say that, Samuel. I've never been called father, not once in my life, but when you look at me, I feel it. You're my son, and I'll fight heaven and earth before I let them strip that from us." Samuel's tears fell fast, his voice trembling but certain. "Then you are my father, no matter what they say." The words landed like thunder in Nathan's chest. He pulled the boy close, holding him with all the strength he had, the firelight casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the land in silence. But Nathan knew it was only the calm before the storm, a storm that would soon test the bond that had just been spoken into life. The snow never seemed to end. It piled against the cabin walls, drifted high in the pasture, and swallowed the sound of the world in its cold hush. Nathan spent long hours hacking paths through the drifts, his breath thick in the air, his arms aching with each swing of the shovel. Samuel trailed behind him, bundled in Nathan's old coat that hung nearly to his ankles. The boy insisted on helping, even when the snow reached nearly to his knees. "Easy there," Nathan said, resting on the handle of the shovel as he watched Samuel push at the drift with a stick. "You'll wear yourself out." Samuel straightened, panting, his cheeks flushed from cold and effort. "I want to help. I want to be strong enough to stand with you." Nathan's chest tightened. Those words came from a place far too deep for a boy his age. He crouched down, placing a gloved hand on Samuel's small shoulder. "You are strong enough. Strength ain't just muscles, it's heart. And you've got more of that than most grown men I've known." Samuel blinked up at him, and the small smile that broke through his chapped lips was enough to warm Nathan's bones more than the fire waiting inside. But warmth never lingered long on the prairie. 2 days later, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the quiet. Nathan had been splitting wood out back, and the moment the sound reached him, he froze. It wasn't the lone, wandering gait of a traveler. This was a group, 3, maybe 4 riders, moving steady, purposeful. Samuel, who had been stacking kindling, stiffened, his eyes darting toward Nathan with raw fear. Nathan set the axe aside and reached for his rifle, his body moving with the practiced steadiness of a man who had stood his ground before. He guided Samuel inside the cabin quickly. "Stay behind me, no matter what," he ordered. The boy clutched his sleeve. "Is it him, the man who says he's my kin?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "We'll find out soon enough." He stepped onto the porch as the riders drew near. At their head was a tall, broad man with a thick beard and eyes too sharp to belong to someone coming in peace. Behind him rode 2 others, both rough-looking, their coats heavy and their expressions colder than the snow. The bearded man reined in just short of the fence, scanning the cabin, then fixing his gaze on Nathan. "You Nathan Carter," he called. Nathan didn't lower the rifle. "I am." The man shifted in his saddle, his voice booming. "Name S. Henry Pike. I'm here for my nephew. Boy S. been missin', and word is you've got him holed up here." Inside the doorway, Samuel gasped, his hands clapping over his mouth. Nathan's eyes flicked briefly toward him, then back to the man. "Your nephew, you say? Funny, the boy never spoke of an uncle, only of a mother who took ill and left him alone." Pike's eyes hardened. "He's blood. Ain't no one else left to claim him. You've got something that belongs to me, Carter, and I aim to take him home." Nathan took a slow step forward, his rifle steady across his arm. "The boy ain't a thing to be claimed like a sack of grain. He's under my roof now, and he's stayin' where he's wanted." The men behind Pike shifted uneasily, but Pike only sneered. "You think you can keep what ain't yours? You're a fool, rancher. Law's on my side." Nathan's voice came low, heavy as stone. "Law or no law, no man's tearing him from my hands, not while I breathe." Inside, Samuel cried out, his voice breaking through the standoff. "Don't let him take me, Nathan, please." The words struck like lightning. Pike's face twisted, his eyes narrowing. "Boy, you hush. You don't know what you're saying. You need family, not some lonely rancher." Nathan's chest burned at the sight of Samuel trembling in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. He raised the rifle higher, his voice sharp as the crack of thunder. "I said he's staying. If you want to try me, then step off your horse and find out how far I'll go." For a long, charged moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind cutting across the snow. Pike's men shifted in their saddles, exchanging wary glances. Finally, Pike spat into the snow. "This ain't over," he growled. "You can hide behind your gun all you like, but the law'll come, and when it does, you'll lose him." He yanked his reins, turning his horse sharply. The others followed, and soon the sound of their hoofbeats faded into the distance. Nathan stood unmoving on the porch, rifle tight in his hands until his knuckles ached. When at last he lowered it, Samuel burst forward, throwing his arms around Nathan's waist, his sobs muffled against the rancher's coat. "You won't let him take me, will you?" Samuel choked. Nathan wrapped a strong arm around him, pulling him close. "Not now, not ever. You're mine, Samuel, don't you doubt that." The days after that were heavy with tension. Nathan knew Pike's words weren't idle. A man like that didn't ride away without planning his return. Nathan kept the rifle closer than ever, even bringing it inside at night. Samuel hardly left his side, his eyes flicking toward the horizon whenever the wind carried the faintest sound of hooves. One night, as the firelight flickered against the log walls, Samuel spoke, his voice soft but steady. "If I had a real father, he'd fight for me. He wouldn't let anyone take me away." Nathan looked across the fire at him, the boy's face shadowed but his eyes burning bright. He swallowed hard, his voice rough. "Samuel, you do have a father." The boy's lips parted, his breath catching. "You." Nathan nodded slowly, his chest heavy but certain. "I've never been called it before, but that's what I am now. I'm your father, Samuel, and no man alive will convince me otherwise." The boy's eyes brimmed with tears, but this time they weren't born of fear. He crawled across the floor, wrapping himself around Nathan's arm, his voice breaking as he whispered, "You're my father. You are." Nathan's throat burned, his eyes wet as he pulled the boy close. "That's right, son, and I'll bear that name until my last day." But their bond, spoken aloud at last, would be tested more fiercely than either could imagine. For Pike was not finished, and the prairie had a cruel way of tearing at what little peace a man could find. And soon, Nathan would have to stand not just with his heart, but with everything he was, to prove that the word father could not be stolen by law or blood, but was carved in the fiercest love a man could give. The morning the men returned, the world seemed to hold its breath. Snow lay in stiff drifts against the fence, and the sky was hard and silver, offering no mercy. Nathan rose before dawn, the cold settling into his bones as if it belonged there. Samuel slept fitfully, bundled like a bird beneath quilts, and Nathan watched the boy for a long time before he could tear his eyes away. He thought of the way Samuel had curled into him the night the riders first came, how the word father had slipped out between them like a vow. That vow felt heavier now, bearing down with the weight of a promise Nathan had no intention of breaking. He had seen men test him before, neighbors with trespassing cattle, claim jumpers at the edge of town, yet none had the slick arrogance of Henry Pike. Pike spoke as if the world owed him answers, as if every man with a roof over his head owed him what he demanded. Nathan had held his ground then with a rifle and a stubbornness that came from a life of proving himself against the land. But this was no simple trespass. This was a child's future on the line, and the justice of men was a crooked road in winter. The horse's hooves were the first warning, far off at first, then closer, deliberate like a drumbeat approaching a lone cabin. Nathan moved without thinking. He fed the stove, checked the gun, and then gently woke Samuel. The boy's eyes opened, wide and raw with sleep, and when Nathan told him to get dressed, the tremor in his hands betrayed the fear beneath the surface. Samuel slipped into Nathan's hand-me-down coat, pulling it close around his chest as if it could armor him. They waited together on the porch, the world around them muffled by snow. Nathan could see the riders through the trees before they reached the yard, 4 men, hard-faced with Pike at the head. He felt the old law of the prairie settle over him like a coat. When trouble came, you stood in the yard and met it. He set his jaw and met the men on the porch as they dismounted, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm, though he kept his voice steady. "Henry Pike," Nathan said, nodding once as if the greeting were a formality. "You rode a long way for kin." Pike's eyes scanned the cabin like a man counting spoils. "You've got my nephew," he said without preamble. "I'm talking him home." "You mean claimin' what you think's yours," Nathan replied. "Kid, 's not a thing to be hauled off." Pike smiled, a cold thing that didn't reach his eyes. "Law 's on my side, I've proof. Folks don't take kindly to men keepin' other folks' kin for themselves." He unhooked a small roll of papers from his saddle, a lawyer's writ, a signed affidavit, a claim stamped official. The paper crackled in the cold like dry leaves. "This proves it. The boy belongs to my family. Sheriff Morgan's been sent word." Samuel's breath hitched, his knuckles white where he gripped Nathan's sleeve. "No," he whispered. "No, he can't." Pike's jaw tightened. "Child, hush. Men with papers don't listen to small mouths." Nathan's voice hardened. "You bring the law to my door, we'll answer it like men, but your papers don't change what this boy is to me." He stepped forward, not as a threat but as a declaration. "You want him, Pike? Go to court. Present your proof. Don't come to my door and think you take what I'll not hand over willingly." Pike's men moved, the slightest shift that spoke of threats unspoken. For a heartbeat the air hummed with danger. Nathan kept his grip on the rifle, but he let the barrel point downwards, a statement that he would fight but not for bloodshed if it could be avoided. He had made that choice long ago. Violence was a thing that took men whole. He would break if he had to keep Samuel safe, but he would not become a monster in the process. "You think the law can be bought by stubbornness?" Pike scoffed. "You don't have the papers, Carter." "Maybe not," Nathan admitted, "but I've got the truth, and whatever the law says, I'll stand on the truth till the end." He pulled Samuel closer, placing his calloused hand over the boy's small, shaking shoulder. "You hear me, Samuel? They won't take you." The men left with a threat that tasted of snow and rot. They would return with deputies, with men who would follow written law instead of the soft mercy of a man's conscience. Pike's parting silhouette had an arrogance that promised trouble. Nathan watched him ride away, heat and cold battling in his chest. He turned to Samuel and saw the boy's face fall into a look of brittle expectation, an emotion that had been a companion for too long. Sheriff Morgan arrived not long after, his horse slower, his face lined with the semblance of neutrality. Nathan had known him long enough to read the worry behind the badge. Morgan dismounted and stepped up to the porch, his boots leaving dark prints in the snow. "You sure this is the boy?" Morgan asked, urgency threaded through his words. "He is," Nathan said plainly. "He was out by the fence starving. I took him in." Morgan's eyes flicked to the papers Nathan had refused to look at, then back to the man and the child. "There's an affidavit. Pike's got claim. He says the boy's kin. I can't hold him without a hearing, Carter. If you want to fight, if you want to keep him, you'll need to take it to court." Nathan felt the ground tilt under him. Legal battles were a different kind of storm, one that could sap a man's strength without the mercy of a single shot. He had little coin, fewer contacts, and no ear for lawyers' tongues. Still, when Samuel looked up at him, small face etched with a question that needed an answer, Nathan felt a fierceness error had never taught him. "We'll fight the law," Nathan said. "We'll see them in court." Morgan's eyes softened a touch. "I'll give you time to prepare, but Pike isn't the sort to wait. He'll rally men if he needs. You best be ready." The sheriff rode off, leaving behind a hush that settled on the porch like a shroud. Nathan and Samuel sealed the cabin windows against the wind and went about the heavy work of preparing for a fight neither of them had expected to wage in the daylight of men's courts. Nathan filed through what little he had. Receipts, a handwritten ledger that proved he had fed and clothed the boy for days, a neighbor's note, small things that fragility could hold against formal claim. He took nothing for granted, and yet understood how slight his chances seemed. Samuel watched him as dusk fell, eyes like small bright lanterns. "Do you really think we can win?" he asked, in that hushed voice the cold had carved. Nathan crouched to be face to face with him, resting his hands on the boy's shoulders. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know this: no matter what happens, I will not let you be abandoned again. That I promise." The promise was a taut wire of certainty. Samuel clung to it as if it could hold them both. They rode into town together the next morning. Nathan led the horse, Samuel clinging at his side. The town seemed small under the weight of their steps, buildings slumped in the cold, doors shuttered, eyes peering. At the courthouse, a cluster of men watched with the interest of men who savor other people's storms. Pike stood near the steps, smug and certain, his papers tucked tight to his chest like armor. Inside, the cold stone of the courtroom swallowed sound. The judge, a thin man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, listened to claims and counterclaims with the air of one who'd seen human hearts made of both gold and dust. Pike's lawyer spoke in measured tones, each phrase wrapped in the law's velvet. He presented birth records, a faded photograph, names signed in ink with lines of legitimacy. Pike leaned back, satisfied, assured. Nathan spoke last, his words rough and direct. He told the truth plainly, of finding Samuel by the ditch, of the nights warmed by his laugh, of the boy who had claimed a place at his table. He did not pretend to flourish in the legal lexicon. Instead, he offered testimony that might have more power than any document. He spoke of work done on the boy's behalf, of care given, of how a child's eyes lit when he was called by a name that felt like belonging. Each sentence was a rock he dropped into a pool, watching ripples spread across the austere chamber. Samuel sat on the bench, small hands folded in his lap, watching the faces around him. Every now and then he glanced at Nathan with a resolve that steadied the rancher more than any words. At one point, the judge looked at Samuel, then at Nathan, and said quietly, "You both stand before the law. We will weigh the facts and listen for the boy's best interest." The statement had the solemnity of lead. When the judge took his time to weigh the evidence, the room seemed to grow colder. The law would find its path through paper and sworn statements, but in the meantime, Nathan felt an unnameable fear, an ache that had nothing to do with judgment and everything to do with the weight of what being called father had come to mean. He had never imagined protecting someone with everything he had, and now the very fabric of that promise could be shredded by ink. The verdict came as the light outside slanted low across the courthouse steps. The judge read slowly, his voice measured and unforgiving at times. He found that the affidavit bore weight. The birth records and corroborating witnesses lent credence to Pike's claim. Yet the law also weighted current well-being, and there was testimony to be considered about the boy's care under Nathan's roof. The ruling would not be immediate. The judge issued a temporary order. Samuel was to remain in Nathan's custody until a full hearing could be arranged in a matter of weeks. It was neither victory nor defeat, but a brittle reprieve. Relief flooded Nathan like a heat after a long winter. He drew Samuel into a tight embrace, holding the boy as if he could tuck both of them into the small sanctuary of that moment. But even as relief warmed him, a new cold thought crept in. This was delay, not resolution. Pike would not give up. He had more resources than a lone rancher and a boy. Nathan understood then that the coming weeks would be a fight of wills, of reputation, of witnesses and character. It was a different kind of battle, one fought in parades of testimony and the slow grind of civil procedure. They returned to the ranch under a sky that had refused to clear. Snow fell soft like ash, and Samuel chattered cheerfully about the walk home in a voice that tried to make light of the day's strain. But late that night, after the lamps were doused and the cabin settled, Samuel slipped from bed to Nathan's side and gripped his hand. "You kept me," he whispered. "You really kept me." Nathan turned, cradling the boy's small face in his palms. He traced the line of a tear and felt the truth of the name wrap around him again. "I kept you, son. I kept you because you're mine. We'll face whatever comes together." His voice was a quiet hammer, firm, unyielding. Outside, the prairie held its breath, and Nathan felt the world on the edge of something that would snap or hold. The final hearing loomed like a distant storm, unknown, inevitable. He had taken in a child, and in doing so had accepted a destiny he had not planned for. He had chosen the name father and the responsibilities that name demanded. The law might judge, men might scheme, and certain forces might try to unmake what he had made for Samuel. But Nathan Carter had already learned in the deep places of his bones what it meant to stand in the breach. At night, though, the fear showed. Samuel would wake in the dark, his small voice cracking as he whispered, "What if they take me tomorrow? What if today's the last day I get to stay?" Nathan would sit on the edge of his bed, broad hands covering the boy's trembling ones, his voice steady even when his own heart was unsteady. "Then tomorrow we fight again, Samuel. Every day if we must, but you'll not be left alone again, not while I draw breath." Those nights carried them both. For in the silence between them, Samuel began to call him something more. Sometimes a slip, sometimes whispered so soft Nathan almost thought he'd imagined it, "Father." It struck every time like lightning, searing, dangerous, but alive. Nathan never corrected him. He couldn't. Because each time Samuel said it, the name sank deeper, anchoring itself in him like roots that could never be torn out. The day of the hearing arrived with skies as gray as iron. Nathan saddled the horse, Samuel riding in front, his small hands clutching tight to Nathan's coat. The boy didn't speak much. His face pressed into the rancher's chest. He let the rhythm of the ride steady his fear. Town was already stirring when they arrived. Men leaned against posts, women whispered from windows, children stared wide-eyed. Word had spread. Henry Pike had come back with more than a lawyer this time. He had brought men to stand behind him, men who would swear to his story, men who looked at Samuel like he was a possession. Inside the courthouse, the judge sat high, spectacles perched low, his voice even but sharp as he called the matter forward. Pike's lawyer spoke first, his tone smooth, his papers lined up like weapons. He painted Pike as the boy's rightful guardian, a man of means who could provide, a blood relative wronged by a stranger's interference. He gestured toward Pike, who sat with a look of smug certainty, as though the verdict had already been carved. When it was Nathan's turn, he stood slow, shoulders square. He had no polished lawyer, no stack of papers, only his word and his truth. His voice was rough, but it filled the room like thunder. He spoke of the boy he had found starving on the edge of the field, the boy who had known only loss until someone chose to fight for him. He spoke of laughter by firelight, of small hands clinging to his, of nights when storms shook the walls but they held each other fast. "This boy don't need a man with papers," Nathan said, his voice breaking with a rawness that silenced the room. "He needs someone who will stand in front of him when the world comes to tear him down. He needs someone who will be father in more than name, and I'll be that man until my last breath." The judge leaned back, considering. Does the boy wish to speak? Samuel's heart hammered, but he slid off the bench. He walked to the center of the room, his small figure trembling but unbroken. His voice wavered at first, but then steadied, carrying more weight than any affidavit. "I don't want to go with him," Samuel said, pointing toward Pike. "He never came when Mama died. He never came when I was hungry. He never came when I was alone, but Nathan came. He fed me. He kept me warm. He called me son. And I called him father because that's what he is." The room went still. Even Pike's lawyer faltered, his words drying on his tongue. Nathan's throat closed, his eyes burning as Samuel turned back toward him, tears running down his cheeks but his chin lifted high. "I have a father now," Samuel finished, his voice breaking but certain, "and it's him." The judge's gavel struck, the sound echoing through the chamber like a shot. He cleared his throat, his voice measured but softer than before. "The law considers blood, but it also considers the welfare of a child. And what I see here is not just a claim on paper, but a bond forged in care and devotion. Until further cause is shown, custody is granted to Nathan Carter." Gasps rippled through the room. Pike surged to his feet, his face red with rage. "This ain't finished. You can't just—" The judge cut him off, voice sharp as a whip. "It is finished. Sit down or I'll hold you in contempt." Nathan's knees nearly buckled with relief. Samuel flew into his arms, clinging tight, his sobs muffled against the rancher's chest. Nathan held him, trembling as much as the boy, but his voice came strong when he whispered, "You're mine, son, you're mine." They rode home as the sky broke open with streaks of sunlight, the first in weeks. Samuel rode taller this time, no longer hiding against Nathan's chest but sitting proud in front of him, his small hands gripping the reins alongside his father's. For that's what Nathan was now, not by paper, not by decree alone, but by something deeper. When they reached the cabin, Samuel slid down from the horse and looked around with a smile that split the cold air. "We're home, Father," he said simply. Nathan's chest ached, his eyes wet. He crouched, gripping the boy's shoulders, and whispered the words that had burned in him since the first day. "I've never been called Father, Samuel, not once, but you made me one, and I'll never let that go." Samuel threw his arms around his neck, and Nathan lifted him high, spinning him once in the snow before setting him down. The land stretched quiet and wide around them, but it no longer felt empty. For in the heart of a rancher who had once lived alone, the name Father now lived, and it filled the prairie with a warmth no winter could steal.